Welcome to OVA Hour. I'm Jennifer Garrison. I'm an assistant professor at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. I'm also the founder and faculty director for the Global Consortium for Reproductive Longevity and Equality. Welcome. So, as you all know, Buck is pioneering a global movement to advance the science and the research around female reproductive longevity. So we think about reproductive decline in midlife as about far more than just fertility or menopause. We're talking about something that impacts every aspect of a woman's life experience, her career, her family, her well-being. It's truly about equality. And so what we're trying to do is through grant funding to scientific researchers, through collaborations, and through innovation, the Global Consortium and the Buck Institute are trying to accelerate the pace of discovery towards useful products and therapies for women. So if we can understand how and why ovaries are aging prematurely, that is going to have a great impact on understanding why the rest of the body ages. And so as we're building out this ecosystem and trying to build out the scientific research, I have the privilege of talking every single day with amazing scientists and physicians and entrepreneurs, and OVA Hour is my opportunity to introduce you to them. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Alicia Jackson, who is the CEO and founder of Evernow, which is a next-gen telemedicine company that's focused on menopause, and we're going to get to that in a minute. Alicia has a long track record of bringing technological advances to solve pressing challenges facing people across the globe. So she's a PhD graduate of MIT. She served as the policy staffer for the U.S. Senate Energy Committee, and she was a deputy director of the Biological Technologies Office at DARPA, which is the Pentagon's principal engine for disruptive innovation. So in addition to advising several early-stage startup companies, Alicia sits on the editorial advisor board at TEDMed, which is very cool. I'm also honored to have Aaron Gottwald, co-founder and CTO of Evernow. He's joining our discussion today. So Aaron is a serial entrepreneur. He's founded several companies, and he's got a really great history of building both consumer and enterprise startups. And most recently, he was focused on a health data privacy company. So Aaron also has the very amazing distinction of being the first male guest on the OVA Hour webinar. So welcome, Aaron.
Thank you.
Welcome, Alicia.
Thank you.
So, this is only the second time we've had anyone who is in the private industry on the webinar. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about Evernow. What is Evernow and how did you found it? What was it that led you to start Evernow?
Well, Evernow is a telemedicine company focused on menopause and more broadly, all the health impacts that menopause has on women's bodies and lives. It was not my life plan to start a menopause company. This is not where I thought I would be. My background is in the hard sciences with a PhD. I was actually looking at fertility and was very excited about all the advances that we were seeing in the fertility industry, how fast it was growing. And I was deep diving into the space, learning as much as possible, and came across some really interesting research looking at infertility in young women who'd essentially been sent into early menopause due to chemotherapy. It had shut down their ovarian function. And the research was actually talking about reversing menopause. And I just remember hearing that phrase and thinking, what are these people talking about? Like, how is this even possible? And how would you even reverse it to begin with? Isn't this a one-way street?
It's not.
It's not, which is awesome and incredible and just lit me up, and was really this really interesting intersection of fertility and menopause that I had never thought about before. And in particular, I was so excited, or I was just kind of blown away by the fact that if you look at when menopause happens prematurely, that is in younger women in their 20s, if you look at the health effects it has on their bodies, things like diabetes, cognitive effects, increased risk of neurodegenerative disease, early death, metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, the list goes on and on and on. And so it's really seen as a pretty drastic health event in a woman's life if she goes through premature menopause. And the medical guidance is quite clear that these women should be treated with hormonal therapies to restore their levels to what they should be premenopausal to combat all these health effects that are occurring.
When you say younger, what do you mean?
Younger women is typically anyone under the age of 40.
Right. Okay.
And I think the really interesting thing to me, or the insight that I had, was, okay, so we're talking about all these health effects that premature menopause has on younger women's bodies. What happens when you go through natural menopause? That is menopause above the age of 40, more typically around the age of 50 in the United States. And if you look at all the health impacts, they're exactly what you see on younger women. The issue is we just call it getting older.
And somehow that's supposed to be okay.
Exactly.
Right. We just accept it if you're getting older, but if it's happening in a younger woman, then it's a problem.
Very true.
Right.
And that was pretty astonishing to me, especially as I see this age approach and this stage of life approaching. All I could think was, wait a second, when this happens to me, when I go through menopause, are you telling me that there isn't the same kind of medical treatment and protocols that are set up to address all these health impacts that are going to happen to my body? And that was really the genesis of Evernow, which was thinking through how can we actually treat the health impacts of menopause no matter what age they're occurring in a woman's life.
Okay. And what about you? How did you decide to join a company, to found a company, actually, to co-found a company focused on menopause?
I've built a number of technology companies in the past, and I think for me, I was interested in aligning sort of my values and sort of having a deeper sense of purpose to my work. And I, like Alicia, did not sort of set out with a life goal of building a company in the menopause space, but being exposed to these same things that she brought up, realizing there's such a huge underserved audience, and specifically in building technology products that help to improve the quality of care. This is, it's a space where there aren't good, uniform good options for patients nationally, and it's a problem space that's very well aligned to a telemedicine approach, and so it hit me at the right time, and then there was just real synergy with Alicia in sort of figuring out where we want to go and building this thing together.
Okay, so let's talk about menopause. We talked about it before, but let's talk about it again. And in the context of Evernow and what it does, we haven't actually told anyone what Evernow does. So we actually have a slide, I believe.
Oh.
Let's see if I can make it work.
I mean, maybe while you're pulling it up, I can talk a little bit about the vision and what we hope to bring to our understanding. And really it's about moving medicine forward for women. I think for so long, especially over the course of medical research, the default body has been the male body. And we've begun to understand that the female body is quite different. The challenges here is that men and women do age differently. And the understanding of how women age and how they age differently than men and the impact that menopause plays is really misunderstood, and there's really a lack of understanding there. And I think the thing that really brought us together here was being able to leverage technology to not only treat menopause in a better way, which I'll talk about, but also be able to collect the data and structured data over tens of thousands of women, hundreds of thousands of women, way more than one single doctor can ever see, and use that information to move our knowledge of menopause and the health impacts forward.
Right. Yeah, the idea that biology's baseline is the male body has been really problematic for women's health in general.
Yes.
So let's see, do we have the slide up? I can't remember how to do this. There we go. I got it.
There we go.
All right, so this is a slide actually from your website, which I really enjoyed, because it really splits up what's happening early versus sort of middle versus, after menopause is concluded. And it's, there's a huge constellation of symptoms here. Some of them are extremely serious. Some of them are more just vasomotor symptoms, but all of them dramatically affect a woman's quality of life.
Yes.
So do you want to maybe take us through some of them and
Yes.
talk about?
I would love to. And all this information is actually taken from our own data from about 40,000 women. It was from one of our very first data sets where we were tracking the different symptoms and their severity according to where a woman was in her, we'll call it menopausal journey, whether she was premenopausal, perimenopausal, in the thick of the menopausal transition, estrogen going from 100 to 0, or several years out from there. I think one of the most interesting things that we found was that a lot of the cognitive effects and the mental health effects seem to really happen in perimenopause when your estrogen levels and other hormonal levels are fluctuating the most. Then we see those kind of tamp down. We see hot flashes and night sweats and sleep disruption really rocket up in the thick of menopause and the menopausal transition. And then we slowly see those, soften out, not disappear, but then we tend to see a lot of the GSM symptoms of menopause, vaginal dryness, painful sex, urinary issues really tend to crop up because a lot of those vaginal tissues have been deprived of estrogen for so long. And so what you really see is this is a very long journey through menopause. It's just not a single point of time when you stop having your period.
And so thinking back to, or coming back to actually to what you're doing at Evernow, can you tell us a little bit about how you're tackling these things?
So, I think it starts with, great data collection as we're bringing our patients on board. So, broadly, Evernow is a telemedicine company focused on menopause. We're currently in, I don't know how many states, 20-something states.
We cover about 80% of the U.S. population right now.
That's awesome. So I don't know that much about telemedicine, to be perfectly honest, and I'm not sure whether our audience does or not, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about telemedicine versus how does it differ from, going to the doctor in person?
Sure. Telemedicine, I think there's a broad spectrum of telemedicine companies that you could talk about. Some of them are closer to what you might just experience in going to a doctor, but are sort of translated into either video calls or phone, some form of televideo kind of connection. Evernow, we're trying something a little bit different, which is that we're going primarily asynchronous, which means that we work mostly via things like text messages and email and messaging through our own platform. We found that our audience has a lot of things going on in their lives, and one of the early questions was how do you, if the current state of the art is that you schedule with a doctor or a specialist, and then you wait several weeks to go see them, and then you have a very short window of time to speak to that doctor. How do you make the most out of that time? And how do you prioritize that against the rest of your schedule? And our asynchronous approach means that patients can find us on the internet, and they can message us in the middle of the night, and they might hear back from a provider immediately. It's something that fits with sort of the way that our modern world works well, and sort of the needs of our customers, which we found to be busy, enmeshed in lots of other aspects of their lives, and that this is one of those things that oftentimes takes a lower priority relative to kids or family or careers or things that have fixed hard deadlines.
Right. There's sort of like the model for medicine was formed around a different world, right? A world in which you might have, half a day every other week or every couple of weeks to go talk to a different provider about something. Whereas now, we're more 24/7 all the time, and being able to access healthcare when you have time is actually really, really important.
Not only when you have time, but when you need it.
And when you need it, right?
And especially for something like going through menopause or treating menopause, you can imagine that you might have new symptoms crop up, you might have side effects from a treatment that you're taking, and so you need to be able to have that feedback loop with your medical provider. I think one of the reasons we chose the telemedicine model was that there are very few expert medical providers in the menopause space. As you know, menopause is a endocrinology subject area, and so it's hard to find a lot of endocrinologists who are actually practicing in the menopause space. A lot of them have gone into fertility, and the great thing about telemedicine is we can take a very small set of world-class experts in menopause, train additional care providers in menopause, and then distribute them via a telemedicine architecture, via this kind of texting modality to so many women, no matter where they're located or when they need help.
So someone who's, in, I don't know, Idaho can access physicians at the top medical centers.
Yes.
and get advice from multiple different sources as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing. And talk to me a little bit about the different modalities that you're covering, right? Because I'm thinking that one of the things that could be an advantage is that you're able to provide not just endocrinologists who might be experts, but other types of physicians with different specialties who might be able to address some of the other concerns that come up.
1,000%. I mean, if you look at the top concerns that come up with our members, with women who are going through this menopausal transition, it's mental health challenges, weight challenges, sleep challenges, you name it down the list, sexual health and wellness. And so we have experts serving as part of our medical advisory board who have expertise in each of those spaces, who then inform our protocols and kind of our treatment regimens that we have for women.
And then in terms of how it works, what exactly are you providing aside from interactions with physicians?
How it works is pretty simple. Women come to the website, they go through an extensive health intake where we collect everything from what are their most severe symptoms, what's their health history, where are they in their menopausal journey, etc. We take all that information and run an algorithm against it to, one, understand whether that patient is a good candidate for telemedicine. People with a more complex health history might be better suited to go to an in-person provider, and we send about 10 to 20% of our members to an in-person provider. The remaining women, we actually give a recommendation to based on our protocols and data that we've collected, so that we can let them know right away that there is a solution for them. We then connect her with a medical provider to further tailor her treatment. And we also send her treatment to her door every month. So she gets 24/7 interaction with her medical provider, and then she gets her treatments every month. And then obviously any sort of follow-up care, any sort of adjustments to her treatment as new symptoms come on board. Her symptoms wane, she might have side effects. We deal with all of those things.
And what sort of medicines are you providing? What kind of treatments are you providing to the patients? Is it just HRT or is it some combination of other things? And I have more questions. I'm just going to keep asking you questions.
That's fantastic. The number one thing that we do is everything we provide has to be evidence-backed. And so the gold standard, as you know, for treating a lot of the health impacts of menopause is hormonal therapies. So we typically prescribe estradiol. We prefer the transdermal form, but we also have the oral form. Progesterone for women.
So, sorry, just to stop there. We've covered this in previous webinars, but why would you want to do oral over a patch or a transdermal application of estradiol?
Transdermal has been shown to have lower stroke risk overall. It's also, you don't have to remember to take it every day. A lot of women find it very convenient. Essentially what's happening is that the estradiol isn't going through first pass metabolism through your liver, and so you don't have these other random metabolites being generated.
Right. Sorry, I didn't continue, please.
Go.
So, estradiol.
We offer, along with progesterone for women who still have their uterus. We also offer SSRIs and SNRIs, low doses of these that have been shown to help with hot flashes and some of the other vasomotor symptoms. For women who can't or don't want to be taking a systemic hormonal therapy. We also offer vaginal estradiol to help with the vaginal symptoms of menopause. And then we're curating a longer list of therapies with our medical advisory board and other advisors that we'd like to offer to women that, for example, we'd love to be able to offer SERMs.
SERMs. So we've covered this before as well, but I can't imagine that everyone is watching every single one of these OVA hours. So SERMs are selective estrogen receptor modulators. And what that means is that, estrogen is a hormone, which means that it's signaling between the ovaries and the rest of the body, including the brain. And the way that the brain or the other tissues know that the estrogen is there is that they have these receptors. And one of the things about hormone replacement therapy that would be wonderful to tailor is that when you just give back estradiol at at a high or medium or low level, but a steady level. It doesn't really mimic, the natural dynamics of a woman's cycle. It also, it fluctuates quite a bit, and so a lot of the side effects that women experience from HRT are obviously related to that. And so selective estrogen receptor modulators, will tickle the receptors on the tissues that we care about, like brain, things like that, bone. We definitely want to continue getting that signaling going between the ovaries and the bone and the ovaries and the brain, but maybe wouldn't necessarily hit breast, which is maybe a place we wouldn't want to be doing that. So how are you incorporating SERMs or thinking about incorporating SERMs into your regimens?
I think the major challenge today is the expense and the fact that the one FDA-approved combination treatment of estrogen plus SERM is currently not available due to a manufacturing issue.
A manufacturing issue? What does that mean?
I don't know the full details. All we know
okay.
from the manufacturer is that it's not available due to supply chain issues.
Oh.
So a lot of women are really struggling right now because they don't have this key treatment available to them.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at other ways of bringing it online.
Wow. And so so you're offering them something else. That's amazing. In terms of telemedicine, one of the things I think that comes up sometimes when we're talking about telemedicine is data privacy, right? Everyone's concerned about privacy, especially on the web.
Yeah.
So how do you handle that, and what's your stance on data privacy?
Sure. Some of this starts with I think about my mom being on this platform, and it's not a, you can't build a company with a policy like that, but it's like an orienting thing for me. Is how do I think about the people that I know and care about, and how would I want to build systems that protect their information. In a past project, I looked a bunch at institutional privacy in medical centers and found it to be it's disconcerting when you start to study it and you understand the amount of data that can flow freely and in an unprotected way. I think one of the advantages that we have as a company is that we're able to use sort of best-of-breed contemporary data privacy things, which are not specific to medical technology. But oftentimes, medical technology will try to solve problems by sort of plugging the hole when they observe a problem.
Right. There's a problem, we got to fix it.
Right.
Yeah.
What we're really trying to do is fix the underlying issue, which is how would we actually protect your information in a fundamental way. And then of course that sort of shakes out in ways where we won't create those same scenarios that we would otherwise have to block. So we're using best of breed technology that in other startups that are also doing high security things like a financial organization or anything that requires contemporary security. We're using those best practices and we're applying it to a health tech company. Best practices don't mean that it will automatically be secure by default. There's I think there's plenty of critique across health tech today in both these modern telemedicine companies and older companies that are working with more institutional customers. We're using the best practices we have and doing it in a way that will allow us to bring on great engineers who will also help us towards these goals.
Cool.
Yeah.
How many people, I'm just curious, how many people are devoted to that?
We've a pretty small engineering team today, but we're growing rapidly.
Yeah.
It's the exciting part about this thing.
Very cool, very cool. So in terms of data, I'm very curious about this pilot study. It's not, it's a huge study, but it's really just the beginning for you, right? But you put together a pilot study that had something like 40,000 women in it. Is that right?
Yes.
So tell me about, first of all, the data you collected. What did it encompass? What kinds of pieces of data were you looking at? And what was the age range of the women who were answering the questions, and how did you collect it?
Sure. So we start, we have this broad, when you come to the company and you're going through the intake, we have a broad set of information that we ask you that Alicia has talked about. And we're able to anonymize that information and use that as a way to understand the customer base that's coming and finding us. So it's distributed across, sort of probably 45 to 65 is our typical age range that we're working with. And so we have distribution across that, and then we have a bunch of demographic data that allows us to drill in there, and then contemporary symptom information, comorbidities, things, other medical interventions that they're currently on. And we're able to use that data to kind of understand our audience, both the audience we have today and also the larger audience of people that we want to serve. It's helping us to refine the products and services that we would offer.
And just adding on to that, I think what's really exciting about it is not only being able to run correlations against that data, but also to track outcomes against that data as well. And so we started doing that, which is women who are on different therapies or on different protocols, we can see how they fare over time, how their symptoms are resolving or not, and use that information to better refine our protocols that we're using right now to treat women.
And where does the algorithm, like, how do you, when you're talking about analyzing the data, because you're not just collecting it, you're actually you're analyzing it and trying to inform your future treatment options. So how does that work?
So like many other sort of modern telemedicine companies, we have what's called a clinical decision support system. So you can imagine it as sort of like a flow chart in your head, right? Where we take a bunch of patient information and we have our medical guidance that's come by way of our independent medical advisory board, and we basically use that flow chart to direct the providers on best sort of, it doesn't make the medical decisions on behalf of the provider, but it helps to guide them towards the established protocols that the company is trying to do. One of the things that I think we have a big interest in is providing a consistent service and consistent medical options based off of the inputs for every patient who comes and sees us. And so these systems help us to ensure that sort of uniformity in our practices. So we use that, and then we separately have analysts who are looking at the raw data to help us continue to refine and inform sort of our future work.
Okay, so you've got this amazing data set, and you're also monitoring longitudinally a subset of those women to see not just how they change over time, but how they respond to the treatments that you're giving them.
Yes.
So that I think is, those are data sets that don't currently exist, right? And this is one of the things that we're trying to change with the GCRLE, just to focus medical research and scientific research around this problem. And I think historically it's really been just about a bias towards male biology, but also just a lack of funding around women's health research in general, and especially around fertility and menopause. Okay, so tell me, have you found anything interesting in the data? Anything that you weren't expecting?
Yes, we found several things we weren't expecting. An interesting correlation that we found, and I want to be careful about correlation versus causation.
Yeah, actually, let's talk about that before we bring up any data, just because I think it's really important for people to understand this. So I want you both to talk about it.
Which is, if we find an association between two things, so for example, between BMI and severity of symptoms.
And BMI is?
Body mass index. And it's calculated from your weight and height. Kind of gives you a sense of how, for example, above a BMI of 35, you're considered clinically obese.
Got it.
Below that, you're not. So we found an association between higher BMI and worse menopausal symptoms. We can just say that's a correlation. It's not clear what's causing one or the other. A really interesting thing that came out of that was that most of our medical team had told us that they were taught in medical school that women who were heavier, who had a higher BMI, should have more mild menopause symptoms because fat stores actually produce estrone, which is a form of estrogen. But we found quite the opposite. Women with a higher BMI have worse symptoms. And so that was unexpected and super interesting, and helps to kind of,
data, actually.
yeah, we do. It helps to guide, where we see this is it helps to guide researchers into where they might want to look, where they might want to dig in to understand what's causing these symptoms, what are the roles of different estrogens. And so I thought that was particularly interesting. Another really interesting one was a correlation we found between hysterectomies and weight gain. It turns out that, so a hysterectomy, regardless of whether you're taking out just the uterus or the uterus and an ovary or a uterus and both ovaries.
Can you talk about why a woman would have a hysterectomy? Like, what are the reasons?
I'm not a medical expert on hysterectomies.
None of us is a medical doctor.
Yes.
It is
Just
one
say
of the
that.
most. It is one of the most common gynecological surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
I think up to a quarter of eligible women have had a hysterectomy.
Mm.
It's very common.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting thing is that it does seem to be geographically based.
What?
Women in the South
Sorry,
tend to
what?
have more hysterectomies than women in other locales,
Huh.
which raises a lot of questions about whether hysterectomies are necessary or not.
Uh-huh.
Some women have them because you can start having abnormal bleeding as you get older,
Mhm.
probably due to some dysregulation of hormones and other
Mhm.
things going on. And so often hysterectomies are seen as a way to kind of just get rid of the problem
I see.
by taking out your uterus.
Hmm.
The challenge is that when you take out the uterus plus the ovaries, overnight you lose your estrogen.
Right, that's
Um,
essentially like inducing menopause. Like it's an even worse cliff than it would be otherwise.
And hearing the stories of women, like their symptoms are terrible, their bodies change overnight, and that you see their weight tend to skyrocket.
Mhm.
Even if you just take out the uterus, it does seem to be that you will enter menopause earlier than expected. It's not
Hmm.
quite understood why. It might be because you're disrupting blood flow. But regardless
It
of
might also be because ovaries and uterus talk to each other, right?
That's
There's-
very likely.
yeah.
Another like huge area for research. But I think the thing that's the interesting thing here is no matter what form of hysterectomy you've had, you are so much more likely to have a very high BMI. Again, we don't know whether it's correlation or causation. One could argue that women with a very high BMI tend to have more hysterectomies.
Mhm.
But anecdotally, we hear from women who go through a hysterectomy that their weight just seems to skyrocket, gaining 10 to 20 pounds in what seems like an overnight event. And if you look at the role of estrogen and metabolism and regulating insulin, it makes sense that these women would suddenly gain weight. It's well known that during the menopausal transition, your rate of fat accumulation doubles. And so you can imagine losing it overnight.
Your
rate
rate of fat accumulation doubles
Yeah.
during the
In
menopausal transition.
the
Wow.
Swan study found that for Black and Caucasian women in particular that this occurred.
That's incredible. Just more reason for basic research. There's so much that we don't know. And I wanted to just stop and pause for a second because we talked about estradiol. So you're providing estradiol and HRT, which is normal. Estrogen is something we talk about too, and estradiol is a form of estrogen. Then you talked about estrone coming from fat, which is another derivative of estrogen. So this is something that I think is maybe not widely appreciated by people outside of science or medicine, but there are so many different forms of these steroid hormones that circulate in our bodies naturally that are not captured necessarily with the big three in hormone replacement therapy right now, right? So right now you provide some kind of estrogen, some kind of progesterone, and for really forward-thinking doctors and telemedicine companies, low-dose testosterone or androgen. But there are literally dozens of other steroid hormones that are circulating, possibly at lower levels, maybe on different cadences and different cycling patterns than estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. But have you thought at all about providing other sorts of hormones in your hormone replacement therapy? Is that a direction for the future?
Oh, completely a direction for the future. I think it's limited to think that there's only two, estrogen and progesterone. It's great that you also brought up testosterone, which we know is critical for a lot of healthy functioning of the body as well. There's DHEA. We have a bunch of other hormones that we know that are involved. I think we really just need the medical research on those to catch up so that we can actually apply them clinically.
Right. So we're working on it. Okay, so BMI and hysterectomy is very interesting. Anything else that came out of the data that you collected? And you should jump in, Erin, because you look at the data every day, I'm guessing.
She's actually more familiar with this specific data. The thing that I was thinking about in this was that, we want to be evidence-based, and you're right. There's sort of a lack of principal research on this. We have this same study that when we released it had 40,000 people go through. We've got something like 85,000 that have gone through since.
Wow.
And so we're building this data set, and our goal is to participate as part of sort of the broader scientific community in moving the science for this forward. because we're able to take something that is a fairly narrow audience. If you think about a gynecologist, practicing medicine and specifically seeing a handful of menopausal patients versus being able to do this at this kind of scale, we can ask interesting questions that might be difficult to collect a longitudinal data set around. And then we can act on it if we, with the appropriate medical research and sort of folks in the mix to apply it to a very large audience very quickly.
Right, like the analogy is that oftentimes, especially in an area of medicine like menopause or fertility, the best doctors are the ones who have seen a lot of patients and had a lot of experience in the field. And so they build up their knowledge of what's happening on the ground and then apply that, and they get better and better at it, right? Just like we all get better and better at our jobs as we do them. And so in this case, instead of having a lifetime supply of, a few thousand patients that you've seen and that you've stored information about and can access that data, this is across orders of magnitude more women in a much shorter period of time.
Yep.
And you're taking the human equation out of it, right? Because the truth is, if I'm a physician, it's the end of the day and I've got to go pick my kid up from school or get to a dinner, I might talk to you for 10 minutes about 5 different options, when really if I had all the time in the world, I might talk to you for an hour about, 20 different options that are available to you. And that's, again, comes back to sort of the way that we live today. So in terms of was there any other data that you wanted to highlight just before I move on?
I think one of the, if we talk a little bit about some of the outcomes data, I think one of the exciting things we found is that right now, standard of care is really to only prescribe hormonal therapy for vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes, night sweats, some of the vaginal symptoms. I think one of the exciting things we found is that not only is hormonal therapy super effective for those, but it also makes a big difference for women in terms of weight changes that they're facing, a huge difference in their mental health, anxiety, and depression. And this is all self-reported. But I think having this treasure trove of data just shows how effective these hormonal therapies are across the spectrum of symptoms that women might be having beyond just the traditional vasomotor symptoms that everyone thinks about.
Right. We had a whole webinar devoted to the WHI study and the sort of the myths around hormone replacement therapy and why it's probably a good idea for most women. Of course, it's always going to be a risk-reward equation and is always going to be based on the individual and their conversations with their physicians. But the idea that HRT, should be administered only for vasomotor symptoms, I think that's outdated, and that's a myth that we need to bust. We also talked about, the timing of HRT, right, in terms of when you go through menopause. So perimenopause is sometimes characterized by 5-10 years, right? It can go on for quite a period of time. And then transitioning through menopause can also take a few years. And then once you're past menopause, there's a timing component to it. So you really, based on the data, women should start HRT within 6 years of ceasing cycling or starting menopause. So in terms of the data around the women who are a little bit older, are there any trends that you've seen in terms of their ability to respond to HRT, things like that?
We haven't gone that deep into the data yet. I don't think we have enough of it to make clear findings from it or get kind of clarity around what we're actually seeing. Part of it is because when women do come to us later, we don't tend to put them on systemic HT. We'll typically put them on a vaginal form, for example, which any woman can take.
Right.
And is highly effective. Although, again, timing matters. For all of this, timing matters. And I don't think I can say that more strongly. Earlier is better for long-term health. And I do hope that that is something that our data shows over time as we collect it.
Right, so that we can actually move the needle in terms of the medical community.
Yes, but we will see. We'll see what the data says.
Yeah, right, exactly. We're agnostic about what the data says, and whatever it says, that's where you'll go.
Yeah.
Cool. What were you going to say, Erin?
Oh, I was just agreeing.
Okay. So there was one other piece of data that we made a slide for, I think, and it was about perimenopause and mental health.
Yeah.
So I'm a neuroscientist, and I study the part of the brain that signals to the rest of the body and controls homeostasis, right? So it controls energy homeostasis, which would be related to food intake and things like that, fluid homeostasis, which would relate to water weight gain, body temperature regulation, which could relate to hot flashes. It also controls things like reproductive function and circadian rhythms. So, those neurons that are controlling reproductive function are embedded in the same brain region where all of these other things are controlled. And so when you think about it that way, and you look at it through the lens of the brain, all of the symptoms that we talk about with perimenopause and menopause, and even earlier periods and pregnancy and childbirth, all of those things kind of come into sharp focus. And so what did you find in your data around women in perimenopause?
Well, what we found was that they did tend to have the most severe mental health symptoms and cognitive symptoms. So I thought that was really interesting, which is, again, zeroing in on the impact of these hormonal changes on these brain regions where all the control centers are.
Yeah. It's clear that it's not just the physiology that's controlled by those brain regions, but also the behaviors.
Yes.
And there's a huge connection there to mental health.
And a huge connection, and it's well known that you do see an uptick in kind of mental health disorders around perimenopause, triggered by this hormonal dysregulation, is what I'll say. And a lot of women feel like it is all in their heads. They can't figure out like why they're suddenly having panic attacks for the first time, or why they feel this anxiety, or why they feel like just this sense of almost rage is what we hear about. And they feel like they're almost like losing control of who they are. And I think what's important just to communicate to women is that this is due to their hormones changing. Nothing is wrong with them. This is exactly what you would expect to happen, and that it is an addressable thing.
Right, that is treatable.
It is
And that
treatable.
it's not something that's necessarily irreversible.
Yes.
Right. Well, that's a positive message to
Yes.
to end that question on. Is there anything else that you wanna talk about with respect to either Evernow, HRT, or menopause?
I think that, you mentioned, so yes, we're using data as a critical component of how we make uniform care. And we're trying to evolve our practices. We get better data. I think our goal is to ultimately create a data set that's usable outside just the Evernow environment. And this data is not so that the robots can practice medicine. This data is to give the best medical folks that we have the ability to deliver the best possible care. And the critical thing I think I've learned over the last 2 years in doing this is that we can sort of use these algorithms to help tailor to each patient's individual needs. But the thing that patients want, and we sort of touched on it there, was that you can go through this experience and feel very alone, and most patients experience it very alone. And the critical part is not just having great medical folks working on this, but in that individual human connection. And I think that's really at a core of what we are as a company, is more than the technology or the delivery mechanism of telemedicine or the specific therapies that we're delivering, but it's supporting each person as they're going through this journey, and connecting them in a broader sense to other people who are doing it. And we can find analogies from patient 1 to patient 2, and that helps us to improve that care each time. So there's sort of a building component that, as we're scaling this company, that the scaling of the company sort of almost inherently means that we can continue to evolve our practices.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's a really important point, that this is not about turning computers into doctors, that there's going to be some, some I don't know, George Jetson style, push a button and something pops out and talks to you in a very strange voice. So I guess that's really, that brings me actually to another question, which is, how long has Evernow been around?
We formed the company roughly 3 years ago.
Okay.
Aaron came on board right at the beginning and co-founded it with me. We started serving customers a few months before COVID began, so a little before March, I believe, 2020.
That's about when the consortium started too.
Yes, which turned out to be just really good timing. And we've grown throughout then as a company, really brought on a phenomenal group of medical providers and team who really care a lot about the mission and the vision and really rethinking how we deliver healthcare for women in a way that can provide them a better care experience and the best treatments possible, and collect the data that actually moves the science and knowledge of menopause forward for all women.
And so are you collaborating with scientists to let them use your data if they want?
We would love to collaborate with scientists to let them use our
Those of you
data.
out there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. I mean, that's one of the things that we talked about and one of the reasons we got in touch with you.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I think we have some questions. Let's see. So we sort of touched on this question already, but maybe you could talk about it a little bit more. What about therapeutics beyond estrogen and estradiol?
I think there's a new drug that has been approved, estrital,
Estrital.
which is another form of estrogen, typically found, I believe, in pregnant women. That seems to be fairly effective, and interestingly enough, I think less of a strong binder than estradiol to the estrogen receptors. So I think it has some attractive benefits to it. It seems. So that's new. I do think that in general, I think we're frustrated by the lack of commercially available FDA-approved treatments in this space right now. It has really been, to put it quite honestly, a backwater of medicine. There hasn't been the best minds working on this, bringing the best therapeutics to market for women.
Yeah, I think we've touched on this number before, but I don't remember it exactly. The number of menopause providers who are certified by the NAMS, by the National American Menopause Society.
There's less than one for every 50,000 menopausal women.
Oh gosh, see, sometimes I say less than one for every 30,000. So it's worse than I thought.
It's worse than you thought.
Great. Just another reason why we need to talk about this and do more research. Okay, well that's interesting. Let's see. Oh, this is an interesting question. Do you need to get blood work for telemedicine?
That is a super common question, and you can understand why somebody might ask that.
Yeah, because you what do I do?
What are my
Where
levels?
do I go?
What are my levels? What's a normal level? I think, unfortunately, blood work isn't nearly as useful as we'd like it to be. Every woman, essentially has a different set point of estrogen that feels good for her. There's basically a normal range.
Right.
And as long as you're in that normal
different.
range, and women's bodies, especially premenopausal, can vary 8x in the level of estrogen in the body over the course of a month. And so to really understand what's the right level of estrogen for you, you need to be tracking it almost daily, at least.
At least. We've talked about this a lot, just how individualized a woman's cycling and physiology is, and complex, right? And so the sort of the solutions that we come up with need to be equally individualized. So if you wanted to measure, you would first need to know your baseline levels across your cycle, and then you would need to monitor them longitudinally to see how they were changing. And so in an ideal world, I think we would be able to monitor that. We would be able to know, I would be able to know, and you would be able to know where we were in our individual reproductive span trajectories, right? And we actually did the last OVA webinar talking all about that, aspirationally thinking about it. And I think, taking a static snapshot on day 2 of your period of what is an incredibly dynamic system is just not helpful. All right, let's see. And let's ask this next one to you, Erin, and then you can answer it, Alicia. Just to trying to, balance things out here. Gender equality
Yeah.
is what we're talking about in the long run. Is there anything exciting or new being developed on the horizon?
Well, I mean, organizationally, we're obviously scaling rapidly and working to, serve more women, to broaden our treatment methodologies, to bring more providers on to the platform. The bigger things I'm really excited about, though, move us closer to this vision of a continuous connected care, right? Where when you think about going and seeing your doctor about menopause, you might, if you're lucky and you had the best, sort of schedule, you might be able to see them once or twice a month if you sort of put the pedal to the metal and tried. But your symptoms can change and your experience can change and you may have side effects. And where we want to go is not simply to replace what might be the experience of going to see a specialist in the real world, but to do something that's even better, which is that we can observe you across day-to-day changes, right? And so it might be you pressing a button on your watch when you have a hot flash, and it might be your connected scale giving us information about your weight fluctuations, and it might be an aura ring or any number of other things that can give us temperature fluctuations, and we can use that, and that can feed into these algorithms that we've talked about, and that might mean that we can detect that you're experiencing symptoms before you can even really consciously note them. I think when you have chronic conditions, oftentimes it's very easy or it's very difficult to know really concretely, like, is this different than last week or last month? Is today normal? Because you sort of become familiar with the experiences that you have. And so by collecting this information, it should allow us to sort of get in front of your own ability to report a change so that we can adjust your treatment proactively, that a provider might be able to reach out with you and talk to you about things that you were just starting to feel. And I think that's the vision for where we want to go. It's something that's like bigger and richer than the status quo. Like, we're not trying to just build a better version of what we have today.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting. That's why I wanted to bring you on here.
Yeah.
Okay, Alicia, new cool things on the horizon.
New
What's
cool
coming
things
up?
on the horizon.
Yeah.
I share the vision that Erin articulated about really being able to be very proactive with our care. I'm also just really excited about the deep scientific understanding that research like yourself, Jennifer, are digging into around what's causing menopause? Can we delay it? What happens if we delay it? I find that just terrifically interesting and so important for women's health span and longevity.
Yeah, obviously we think that's kind of cool too. If you know anything about us at all here. Great. Yeah, I think that that's exactly right. We want to understand what are the causal factor or factors or cue or timers, whatever they are. We want to know what's causing ovaries to start to decline. So like just every single woman is going to experience this in midlife, and then try to intervene. That's the goal. And I think that the data that you're generating will be of incredible resource for scientists and will hopefully help point us towards maybe what that causal factor or cue might be. So thank you very much for joining us. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the discussion. And if you want to tune in next month, we'll be back. And if you want to learn more about reproductive longevity and equality at the Buck Institute, you can find us on the website. There's a QR code up there right now if you want to donate to help us give grants to scientists to work on this problem. And yeah, we really appreciate you tuning in.